Right, so for those of you who's joined us today, and for those of you who'll be catching up on YouTube later, I'm Jimmy. I'm the Dragon painter. Uh, so today's lesson is going to be all about washes. So basically, washes is it's just diluting a paint so that when you paint it over a model, it tends to go into the crevices and flow off of the raised parts and basically add in instance and contrast to any surface that you apply it to. So how to make a good wash basically depends on your understanding of what the actual paint is itself. So if we were to take pure black for an example, this is basically, it's finely ground particles of a pigment and it's suspended in an acrylic polymer, which is why we call them acrylic paints. Now, the polymer itself is like what we call the medium. So you buy bottles of acrylic medium, which we sell through the Dragon Painter website, which is essentially more of the same stuff. So if you ever not shook up a paint properly and you put it on your palette, you might notice sometimes that a clear liquid comes out first. And what that is essentially the acrylic polymer. It's basically glue that's separated out and all the pigments like sort of sunk to the bottom. So bottles of acrylic medium are just basically that without any of the pigment in. So if I just switch cameras here, and trusty evil looking warrior of some variety there, and he's wearing silver armor. So if we use our pure black, we can use several different chemicals to make effective washes for him. So I've just got my palette here. It's just a random piece of plastic. I used to work in a plastic factory, so I've got literally millions of these things hanging around. They're really useful. So basically, you can make a wash out of three different components. You can use good old trusty water in my mug there, or use a flow improver like isopropyl alcohol or a specialist flow improver that you can buy, including stuff that we sell through the Dragon Painter website, or you can use a glazing medium, which is basically more of that transparent gunk that comes out of a paint pot before you've mixed it up properly. And the difference between these, if we just take the water and we make a wash out of the water there, it's good as a basic sort of thing, but the surface tension of water is quite high. You'll have noticed that if you've ever bath and something that you don't think should be floatable actually does float, and it's because it's suspended on the water's skin. So what that can do is it can leave tide marks on surfaces when it dries, because the surface tension pulls the pigment towards the the edge of whatever pool it's made. So if we're just to take fairly watered down black paint on its own here and got it to about the consistency of like skim milk, and we take like say a flat panel on this guy's shield, and you just sort of like do that on. See where it's the surface tension is basically drawing it to the recess. Because this is, I've chosen a flat panel here specifically because it shows what happens when there is stuff for it to be drawn to. But what it's going to do is it's going to leave a puddle in the middle here where the surface tension hasn't quite broken, and that's going to dry with sort of like a wiggly, wavy line on it. So this, like doing it with water alone is like your most basic option, but you can add a little bit of soap to that, and that helps break up the surface tension and helps it flow better. But there are other things with the just water sort of method that can help. What I've done with this lower panel, I really see it, I don't think, on the camera, but I've actually painted it with a gloss varnish first, which we also sell. And basically what that does is it makes the surface smoother. And you can see that when you put the wash on, it's kind of flowing a lot more evenly. It's not pooling. It's sort of distributing itself a lot easier. And what that's done is, rather than doing anything to the wash itself, it's changed the surface tension of the model. So these models have got tons of microscopic like pits all over them from the casting process. And water's sort of surface tension is such that it will grab onto those little pits for dear life. So that's what causes the kind of the weird tide marks and the drying, and it's already happening on the upper surface there. I'm going to see if I can keep this in focus when I bring it close to the camera. But can you kind of see that in the middle there, there's like a shadow of the wash, kind of making like a shape?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Right. So, but on the bottom panel, that's not happening. So the bottom panel is completely clean in the middle. So if you have gloss varnish to hand and you've got a lot of flat armor panels to paint, that can be a really quick and efficient method. But what we're doing when we're mixing water with the paint is that we're diluting it, but we're not just diluting the pigment, we're diluting the medium that it's carried in as well. So that obviously changes the properties of the paint, because you've got like a weaker, diluted version of it. Now, if you were to say, let's get some more pure black and pop this on the plastic there. So if we're to use, say, a glazing medium, and this is basically more of that acrylic polymer, just without any pigment in it. See, that's quite thick and gloopy there, but it does dry completely clear, even though it looks like PVA right now. This is essentially more of what you've got in here. And when you're using this to dilute the paint with, you're diluting the pigment, but you're not diluting the carrying agent so much. So you do need quite a bit of it. But what you're doing is you're essentially making a weaker paint rather than and you can use a little bit of water just to get it to the sort of desired consistency. But yeah, you're making a weaker paint with less sort of like color permanence, rather than an equally strong paint that only goes into the recesses. So you see that it looks grey, it will dry black. And you're going to be quite sparing with this stuff, but this sort of method's really good. You see his chest out, these articulated plates. And if we sort of just put it over this, what this is doing is, rather than it instantly sucking itself into the recesses and creating those tide marks and stuff, it's actually making a glaze, because you're painting paint all over the area, and it's going to stain everything that it touches. So you can end up with darker gunmetal colored armor here, which is, when it dries, it's still sort of like sucks itself into the recesses with surface tension, because all the like physical properties of it have changed somewhat. It isn't quite as pronounced as it was in the shield. See, now the shield's dry. You can see there for definite, the top one's got a tide mark in the middle, and if you're going to tidy that up, you'd have to layer over it again with paint. Whereas the bottom one, it's got a bit of a tide mark around the the bottom of the shield where it reaches the trim, but the effect isn't nearly as pronounced. And I've actually gloss varnished this shoulder pad here, so while we've got the watery paint out, we'll see if that, if it does the same effect. So this doesn't take very long to dry in here, because I'm painting in my attic at the moment, which is basically a greenhouse. So there we go. There we are. So we'll give that a few moments. So you see, as the let me get a bit closer there. As the is that in focus? No. There we go.
There we go.
Yeah. Right. Well, you see there that where we've got it on is chest and abdomen armor. It's kind of, as it's drying, it is sort of like pulling itself into the recesses a lot, different. It's not leaving any tide marks as it dries, and it has stained all the metal slightly, and it's like a very graduated change. So as it gets deeper and deeper into the shadow, it does make a color gradient, which is, full in this circumstance. So while we're waiting for that one to dry, we can do what's called a flow improver. So I've got some MIG acrylic airbrush thinners here. This is basically isopropyl alcohol, and it's not the same as flow improver, because it smells like Smells like bourbon actually, but not a bad smell. But basically what this does is it's like a super duper version of the soap and water technique. So I've got it on my palette there. So we take some black paint. What this is really useful for, if we get that down to the consistency of skim milk again, this prevents it from drying particularly quickly, and it absolutely clings to recesses like an inkwell. If you ever used a fountain pen, you'll know exactly what I mean. That if you're in the ink and the well in the nib uses capillary action to pull the ink out of the well and into the what's the word? The feather bit. So this is basically the exact same thing. This does to paint what ink does to the pen. So if we were to take his visor, for example, this is where I find isopropyl alcohol the most useful, apart from also diluting paint to go in my airbrush. Because if you just gently dab it into any sort of self-contained area where it's not able to spill out, like not on a flat surface, but like in the his visor there, it won't leave that area, and it'll just stay there, and it doesn't dilute the paint. It doesn't make a glaze. The paint remains just as opaque as always, but it's sort of like it becomes almost like jelly. You wouldn't expect something so liquid to actually sort of like just basically stay in a spot. I mean, like I could turn it upside down and none of it comes out. It hasn't dribbled or anything. It looks like the Mandalorian, doesn't he? That's a really useful thing. Also, if you've got like a large amount of models to do, for example, and you wanted to do a quick wash over an entire army of silver armored guys like this, you can load up your airbrush with isopropyl alcohol, put a bit of pure black in there, like a 50-50 sort of mix. So it's kind of like, I keep using skim milk as an example. I got to think of other liquids with the same consistency. But yeah, skim milk, and then spray your army with your airbrush. That can be a real quick way of getting a decent looking wash all over your models, because it will do what it's doing there, and it will suck itself into the recesses, and it will slightly tint the rest of the armor, but it's not going to leave tide marks everywhere. So that's that one. So yeah, so we're just waiting for those different things to dry. The last thing that we can really make a wash out of is flow improver. So what flow improver does is it doesn't have the same surface tension as, say, actual water itself does. In fact, the chemistry of water is fascinating, because it's got all these crazy bonds in it, which means it makes that kind of skin. Whereas other solvents, so to speak, don't have the same sort of don't have the same effect. So there we go. A little bit of black, and we use the flow improver. And what the flow improver does is that you see what it's done there. I popped a bit of black just on the top, and it completely evenly distributes it throughout the mix. It's forming concentric rings here, like on a tree. And as you add more and more into it, basically that's the effect that you're going to have on your model. It's just this amazing sort of liquid that has next to no surface tension at all. It's like sort of form its own sort of puddle shape here, because it keeps drawing into itself and wanting to sort of like run across the surface. And what this is doing again is that it is diluting both the paint and the medium it comes in. So you're not going to get a glaze effect from this. It's not going to darken your armor on the high patches. It's only going to sort of shrink into the recesses, but it's going to do so really well. So we would just lay it on there. I can already see that it's kind of sort of pulling itself into the gaps. It's definitely flowing off of the raised areas like his kneecap there. So if we do that, and where we've done it around his greave, it's sort of, there we go. So it's become instant contrast and shadowing, and it's not, it's kind of like, it is running off of the high surfaces, but it's doing so like at a snail's pace. Sort of like, it almost looks like it's alive up close. It's kind of disconcerting, to be honest. But we do his neck there, just going up to his tabard. You see what exactly what's happened there is you got very, this is good for very high contrast. So you got like a strong tone difference between the high tones and the shadows, but with very little in between. So if your model's going to have like very shiny armor, this is a great approach to have. Makes them look very photogenic instantly. And there we go. You see, again, it's kind of the tide marks on his shoulder where we just use water on top of the gloss.
That's quite blurry, Jim.
Can you see that a bit better?
Slightly to the left. Yeah, that's
there we go. Right, so you see it's shrunk into the recess as well. It has still left its tide marks, but that's not something that we're going to encounter with any other sort of method that we've used today. See, there's no tide marks drying on his chest piece there. There's none drying on his greave or his I've forgotten what armor word is for knee plate. Oh, I used to know this. Never mind. So yeah, so that's basically, I mean, these same sort of techniques can be used on any sort of armor. It doesn't matter what color it is. I mean, if you've got a guy in bright blue armor, then you can do a darker blue, and you can dilute it with all these chemicals that we've just looked at, and you'll get largely the same results. Things with like curved armor plates, for example, I much prefer using the glazing medium, because you get a very smooth sort of graduation of color. But for things with like angular armor plates where you've got very sharp edges, like the light to catch, then you're better off using the flow improver or the isopropyl alcohol, because it really does very quickly flow off of those areas and go only into the shadows, which is a good sort of thing for dirtier armor like you'd expect to find on orcs or the forces of evil in general. Although if your degree of good/evil is measured by how clean you keep your personal effects, then I would probably be very evil on the evil scale. But yeah, so I've got another model here. So organic textures, a different kettle of fish here. So we've got this Dracolisk here, which is from Reaper Miniatures. It is basically a small dragon, but it's got like 6 legs. So what I've got is you've got a mixture of scales, which take to washes very well, and then you've got large, flat skin on his wings there, and that doesn't take to washes nearly as well. So what we've got is, rather than use black on this one, I'm going to use a bit of brown ink. Just as easily use brown paint, but this stuff looks really nice on scales, I've found, because it actually has much of the same properties as the chemicals that we just discussed. I mean, ink itself, just from the very smell of the thing, has got some kind of easily evaporatable solvent in there. So just pop a bit of this on your palette, and this is going to be way too strong to use straight onto the scales. It's basically going to turn them all brown and swamp all the detail. But if you just dilute just the ink with water, you get a completely different effect to what you would with paint. Now, I don't use artist inks very often. They use this very kind of specialist. And if you're skilled enough with it, you basically do the same things with them on models as with paint as you can with ink. But if you just take the scales here, you see, I'm going to see if I can get it closer. It's still in focus. Tell me when it's out of focus. Is that about right?
Yeah.
Cool. what's happening here is that you can see it's instantly shrinking away from the raised point of each scale. And this is it's a very nice color to go with the red as well. Brown is still an organic sort of color, and when this settles in the shadows, it's basically not going to look like the shadows are completely black, which doesn't happen on Earth. You know, shadows are always just a darker color of the same thing. So, I mean, on places like the moon, where there's no atmosphere to do any kind of atmospheric scattering, that's where you get completely black shadows. But unless it's the clangers, you don't get many dragons on the moon. So there we go. So we see that's what happened there. It's whatever's in the ink must be pretty much the same thing as the flow improver, because it dries very fast and it sort of does do that kind of shrinking away from things. But that, while that dries on his scales, basically I'll show you what we've got, what the same sort of techniques work on the skin on his wings. So if we take a similar darkish kind of brown color, which I did have to hand, and now I don't. There we go. So we'll use Reaper's Harvest Brown. And if we want to dilute this just with water to go on the organic surfaces, one moment. Just unclogging it. If you ever find that your dropper bottles are clogging like this, which doesn't happen very often, if you have a pin drill, just drill down the end of the little. There we go. Come right back out again. So this isn't quite as dark a brown, but it'll serve the same purpose. So if we just dilute it with water, first things first, we end up getting the same tide marks as before. So what I've done with this panel on his wing is that I've done the gloss varnish trick again, and his wing sort of has these sort of like muscle fibers sculpted into it. I might have to add a little bit of black to that there because it's not particularly high contrast. Oh, that's a bit better. There we go. So you see there, it's sort of settled into these like muscular striations on the wing, but we're still going to end up with those tide marks. So because it's like sort of drying before it's completely come off of the surface, that's when it starts leaving those like sort of streaks and stuff. So with a large flat area like that, I would suggest simply painting, take this off a wing there, only painting into the actual join that you want to be shadowed. And that way you don't have to like relayer over the higher parts of this particular wing section. So just follow the surface tension will sort of draw it into the line between the flap of skin, well, I guess the bones that he's got there. But you see, as that dries, it's just going to define the shadow, make it clear that this is two different surfaces, make it very obvious where you can do any highlights if need be. And that's what we call a recess wash. So that, rather than just being a panel wash, which is, where you just wash it completely over every flat surface on surface tension to do all the job for you. In this case, it's just painting it directly into the shadow itself. So you see there, that's the two different effects you're getting. It's not quite dry yet, but you see one's a lot more defined, and I would still, go over that around the edges there to tidy the line up with a bit of the base color, but that's kind of already saving you a lot of work. Whereas with this one, it's stained the panel even with the gloss varnish. It has sort of brought out some of the muscular sort of lines that are running along it way, but it is leaving some of those nasty sort of drying lines where it's sort of dried before it's fully finished pulling itself into the recesses with that capillary action. And there we see the ink on the scales has started to dry very nicely there, and that hasn't like stained any of the scales at all. It's kind of just drawn into the shadow underneath each scale and kind of, you know, done the job very, very nicely there. To quickly cover the whole of the scales of the model and that, you could probably leave it there. I mean, I would highlight each individual scale anyway, but that's just me. If you want to save yourself a lot of work, washes are a great way of getting things looking great, especially from the sort of distance you expect to see them from. I mean, from like a tabletop sort of distance, you're often looking at these things from 2 or 3 feet away. And what doesn't pass close level scrutiny easily passes from a sort of that sort of distance. So that's a very, you know, fast way of getting organic things done. Like if I wanted to paint this guy in, say, half an hour, I would spray the whole guy red like I've done here. I would pick out his teeth, claws, and his eyeball in, like, say, like a bone kind of color. And then I'd wash the entire thing with a single wash that complements both red and bones. So a kind of like medium brown sort of color of like coffee staining. And then that would be done. Put some basing materials on him. Jobs are good, and he's all finished. So there we go. We go back to the other guy. We see that the on his chest where we used the glazing medium, it's completely dry now. It's got a really nice graduation of color. There's no nasty drying marks. So for armored models like this with clean armor, I definitely recommend the glazing medium, which we've got through the Dragon Painter website. If you just look under our it's under the core paints section, was it, Hannah?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Right. So has my webcam gone dead? What? Good grief. I think there we go. Accidentally turned it off. Technology 8. There we go. Back to my handsome, rugged face. So, any questions?
I don't have any.
No.
Does anyone else?
No, I'm good. That was excellent.
Cool.
Lots to take in.
Was that any of that stuff you hadn't heard of before, or is it, you know, it's well known to you, Gareth?
I've only ever used sort of pre-made washes.
Oh, okay.
So I've used them before, but I have noticed that even the pre-made washes give the tide marks and things like that.
Yeah, they do. The pre-made washes are basically, it's a paint with the acrylic medium, but that's been heavily diluted with water. So you still get the tide marks because of the water component, and the sort of the hydrogen atoms in it are sort of like repelling each other, and it's causing that surface tension. If you just use the paint and just the glazing medium, for example, that prevents that from happening. So like most companies with their washes tend not to mega dilute them with glazing medium, which I find really curious because it doesn't actually end up with those effects. But yeah, that can be one cure for that, is making your own, but using an acrylic medium rather than water as your solid.
So is the acrylic medium the one you sell on the website?
Yeah, I believe it's just called glazing medium. That's it. And we sell a flow improver as well for the other techniques. I am sorry, somebody's messaging me. I am so popular. Let me just put my phone on silent. Nobody ever talks to me unless I'm in the middle of doing something.
It's always the way.
Oh no, tell me about it. Well, you're the #1 culprit, Hannah. So. No, I'm kidding. Message me whenever. So yeah, you can basically you can apply this to any color as well. I know we've only used like brown and black today, but the thing is with ready-made washes is you're pretty much limited to what the company's provided for you. Whereas if you're making them yourself with these mediums, you can pick any paint that you like and just roll with it. Make your own wash. You can make it to whatever consistency you desire, depending on the properties of the figure that you're painting. Whether you want it to be thicker or thinner can be advantageous. And also, it comes in a pretty big bottle, and it goes a long way. I mean, I've not been afraid of far more than I needed to today just to demonstrate this. So it's a fantastic tool. It's a great arrow to have in your quiver, as they say. So yeah, cool.
Yep, that's great.
I hate awkward silences, like it's, but yeah. So I hope that answered anybody's lingering questions. If anybody watching this later still has any more, feel free to shoot us a message on the Dragon Painter Facebook page, and I will get back to you usually very quickly, because I don't do anything with my days. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.